some future year we'll be able to have back to, by adding a few new back to the original number, do it because we knew we that'll be just
The dirt is probably going
doing it as we do it with paying for everything.
She called me last night.
It's a real, well, it's like a mom and pop store. You know, we don't go to the bank, we don't take loans.
Last night.
For us, it's the most sure way of doing it, making sure that we're paying for
Launch her pastries. No, she seemed to be having a ball. Or at least not a ball, but a very good time.
it has to be coordinated. The program by a Pledge of Allegiance, and so through the. I didn't know how well I would do tonight against Up With People. If any of you came here to see me sing and dance, you might still be able to get into the gym, because I have a song and dance, but it has nothing to do with musical entertainment. And you know, when I'm out at the hotel, I have a very safe province, because there I've been there so long that I can almost say anything I want to and figure out some way to carry it off. But here I have the natural trepidations, because there are people here, I am sure, and I know for a fact, who have independent memories that have nothing to do with my life at the Balsams, and nothing to do with necessarily my perspective or my point of view of this story about the Balsams. And I'm too respectful of the word history to say that everything I have to say tonight is history. I think we would be mistaken if we limited ourselves to only those things which we could prove. I can tell you that in all my years there, I have made an honest effort at trying to gather information from the past. And sometimes it's conflicting. I could tell you the great travails I'm going through to prove that the hotel was there in 1866. And why am I so, there are definitive books that are claiming that it was not there until 1875, 1876, 1874, 1873, all sorts of different years. But Dr. Gifford swears to me, today even, he swore to me, that it was 1866, and it was passed on in the Parsons family as that. He offered me proof. He says he has proof in his files, and his great-grandson has indicated that when he does have a chance to go through his files, he will search for the proof that I need to prove that it was 1866. Dr. Gifford claimed that George Parsons from Colebrook was interested in employing people who were coming back from the Civil War, that he had relatives and friends and neighbors who were coming back, and they needed work, and he had a lifelong interest in building a place out in the Notch, and so he proceeded in 1866 to do so. Just 2 years after a man by the name of Tucker had built a place, which we will see a picture of later. The first hotel built in Dixville in 1864, but that burned down just shortly after it was built. The best part about a story is that you can begin almost anywhere you want to, and probably the same is true for history. But for me, the proper place to begin is beyond any of our local memory, even beyond, I think, the historic memory that has been written about and documented in terms of what people did and when they did it and who it was who did it. And for that, it seems to me that we need to understand that this landmass that we're on is amongst the oldest land masses ever to exist on the face of the earth. It has moved about. It was once down near Antarctica, and millions of years ago it moved to the north. And people have been on this landmass for many, many years. And since the last ice age, which departed this neck of the woods about 12,000 years ago, there is ample evidence everywhere that people have been here, and that they have come here they've passed through, they've lived here, and they have traded here, they've communicated here, they've dealt with each other here, and it's important as I drove down the Mohawk tonight to come to the confluence of the Mohawk and the Connecticut, that we understand that people have been doing the kind of thing that we're doing, gathering in this place here in Colebrook and in that place out in Dixville for literally 12,000 years. The notch was formed when the glacier first went through, thousands of years before that. But as it retreated, it cleared out all the debris that was in there. And Dr. Gifford would tell you that it left all these little glacial eskers, which are the wonderful gravel pits that you see out along Route 26. And on both sides of the road, as you travel out, you will see all of this glacial gravel that was formed by the retreat of the glacier and the formation of Dixville Notch. And the Notch, of course, is in the White Mountains, even though I'm very proud to say that we are now in the Great North Woods. Dixville Notch and those mountains are part of the White Mountain chain, the Appalachian White Mountain chain. And it is the northernmost passage through the mountains. If people were on an east-west passage, to go over the mountain, to go from the Connecticut River to the Androscoggin River, they would choose the Notch to penetrate, to pass through. It was easier than going over the mountains. It was a focal point for people to gather along through the Coos Trail, this wonderful Route 26, which we now know to be basically the primary road and trail that people passed on for 12,000 years as they moved all the way from the St. Lawrence River, where Montreal and Quebec are celebrating 350 years of Western civilization, but if you look at Native American civilization, much greater than that. And they have traveled east and west on that Coos Trail all the way to the Kennebec River in Hallowell, Maine, onto the Atlantic Ocean. So they had connections on the trail overland, crossing rivers at their where the rivers formed, so they were easier to cross. And then having the options of going all the way to the Atlantic Ocean, down the Connecticut River, all the way down through the Atlantic Ocean on the Maine border through the Androscoggin River, or continuing on the road trail to the Kennebec River, and then also making it to the Atlantic Ocean. So where we are is the center of a great deal of human history. And from that, I think what I would like you to understand about why we're here and why the Balsams is there is another aspect that I have been arguing for years as a member of the tourism industry, and that is that tourism, if you will concede to me that humans are natural beings, then I would ask you to concede to me that tourism is a natural resource. Just as trees grow in the forest and waters flow, course in their valleys, people come to beautiful places. People are attracted to beautiful places. There is nothing you can do other than make it not beautiful to not have them come. It is a natural attraction that people are seeking to be in the woods, seeking to be where there's fresh air and fresh water and elbow room. That is a natural attraction. So, and of course, New Hampshire argues that Wolfboro, New Hampshire was the oldest summer resort in America. And Governor Wentworth would argue that the first tourists that came across the border from Massachusetts into New Hampshire in colonial times. But I would argue that it's existed long before that. Indeed, 100 years before there was ever a building in Dixville Notch, a man by the name of Fielding went through the Notch and said that this would one day be a place of grand resort. Now, how could he say that? How could he know that? It's not because there was a great booming resort industry. It was because he could look at it and see that people would want to come see that. There is nothing that you can do to stop them from doing that. And indeed, if you accommodate them to do that, you've created the same kind of, I would argue, the same kind of natural products industry as you would if you were cutting down trees for wood products or producing power along a river because of utilizing the natural flow of water as it goes from high country to the ocean. So it's important because I think if we understand why we're here and what this life and our economy and our culture and our society are all about, it's important to see that it's a natural byproduct of the place that we live, and that we need to maintain the environment. We need to keep these roads open and passable. We need to have a service economy that recognizes visitors for their value that they bring to us. In New Hampshire, for instance, the tourism industry produces 25% of the state's general fund. 25% of all the money that the state has, in a state that doesn't believe in broad-based taxes, 25% of it is generated directly by tourism, which employs 51,000 people, and which has the average size of a hotel is 35 rooms. That's the average size of hotels in New Hampshire, which means they're basically sitting along roadways, waiting for people to drive by. The average size of a restaurant in this state is 35 seats, which means they're sitting along the side of the roadway, waiting for people to drive by. And that is what we are currently having as the generation of great revenues for the state of New Hampshire. Unfortunately, we operate at just over 50% occupancy in a state that relies upon it so heavily, but just over 50% occupancy when the national average is something like 67% occupancy. And I'm talking about occupancy when we're open, not when we're closed. So it's a very interesting concept and dynamic interpretation of what life is like here, and it has its roots well-based into the very first humans that we're passing through. I don't know whether there was a teepee alongside the road that was catering to folks as they passed by, but there definitely might have been, and I know that the Weir's snack bar out on the snowmobile trails might seem remote to some, but that's just because they don't travel the right way. The Balsams is part of a long tradition of hotels here in the White Mountains. There used to be as many as 30 hotels that were considered to be of grand scale, which was to have at least accommodations for 250 guests. That was the minimum definition for what a grand hotel was. It would be able to accommodate 250 guests. And so there was a history of these places forming here in the White Mountains, forming from very humble means. And indeed, that's how it occurred in Dixville as well. And here I would like to just digress a little bit and tell you about how the first guests were treated in Dixville. Basically, we know for a fact that in 1806, a man by the name of Timothy Dix, Timothy Dix Jr., who was a colonel in the American Army, and whose father, Timothy Dix, was a very famous patriot of the Revolutionary War. They had originally been in Littleton, Massachusetts. They moved to Boscawen, New Hampshire, and the Dix family became a very prominent church-going, church-forming family. In fact, their home sits right next to where the original church in Boscawen was, right next to the cemetery, and I had the privilege of touring through that home this spring. It was where John Adams Dix was born. It was where the very first law office of Ezekiel and Daniel Webster. In fact, Daniel Webster's law office was the bedroom where John Adams Dix was born. So it was a wonderful day to have the privilege of touring through this old house, which is being renovated, and it's been owned by the same family now for 50 or 60 years, and they're very, very proud of this. Well, Timothy Dix applied to the legislature in 1806 to have the possibility of buying township number 2, which he was going to call Dixville. They had 32,000 acres in it, and he put on as his two sureties, the people who would co-sign with him for this, two friends from Boscawen. One of them was Jeremiah Jamel, and the other was Daniel Webster. And he offered to pay whatever the legislature would charge, and they charged their price for 32,000 acres of land, township number 2, to be called Dixville, was 9 payments of $500 each. Now the point was for Dix to be given this land at such a good price on the basis that he would settle the land, that he would build roads, that he would build a church, he'd build a school, he'd build a grist mill, a sawmill, which were the things that when he hand drew the map, and I have a copy of that in the sunroom out of the Balsams. If you're ever out there, you can see the handwritten, hand-drawn map that Timothy Dix drew in 1806. And he had all these little buildings that he was going to build along the thoroughfare there. And the notion was that he was to do this because this country, this state, needed people who were loyal to the country living out on the frontier. In the same way as King George had settled the colonies by giving grants of land through the King's Grant system to people who were loyal to the crown, the Tories, and they would then bring pioneers and frontiersmen with them to settle the outreaches of the New World, of New England, but they would settle it with people who had sworn allegiance to the crown because they needed to defend these borders. And after the Revolution, when all of these so-called Tories, loyalists, went up and revolted against the king and won the Revolution, the same requirements were needed by the new government. They wanted to have protection against the English still, the French, the Indians, and of course in 1812, here we were back at war again, and where did they attack from? Right from the northern border. So it was most important that these border communities develop ownership of property and bring settlers into onto the frontier, and that's what Dix was promising to do. He had been a loyal American himself. He had fought as he was a colonel in the service, and he had a son who went to battle with him in the War of 1812. And unfortunately, Timothy Dix was killed in the War of 1812, in 1813 in Canada, in battle against the British. And his 15-year-old son, who was with him, John Adams Dix, saw his father die. And the land, the deal that had been signed and authorized by the legislature, was now kind of in abeyance, but Daniel Webster bought out Jeremiah Jamel and went ahead with the development. His cousin was the Speaker of the House, and so he was given a little forbearance in terms of the time schedule that he had to be on in order to begin to bring settlers there. But he had to, if you didn't complete the terms of the grant when you had received land from the king before the Revolution, what the king would do would be to take the land away from you and give it to someone else, someone who was more industrious or more fastidious or more fortunate to have taken the advantage of all the work you did, but you didn't complete the grant in time, so we would take it away and give it to someone else. As a result, many communities on the frontier had several names because they'd be named after the first person who was granted it. He didn't complete the grant, so they'd name the community after the second person who'd been granted. But in this country, they never did such a thing. They never thought about taking the land away. They simply established their own American tradition, which was they created a land grant tax, which said that not only can you not give the land away, we're not going to take it away, but you're going to start paying very heavy taxes for not having completed the terms of the grant that we authorized in the first place. And so Webster ended up truly having some confounding problems with taxes. He was suffering all sorts of he was embroiled in all sorts of arguments and political fights in Concord. And you should know that Webster was never elected to any office in New Hampshire. It wasn't until he left the state and went to Massachusetts that they elected him to something. But in New Hampshire, he had a rather checkered past. And in fact, our own Secretary of State, Bill Gardner, is writing the biography of Daniel Webster in his life in New Hampshire. And he has told me that Webster's relationship with Dixville was almost the undoing of Webster, and it will be the primary tale of his biography here in New Hampshire. And so I can't wait for it. I told him I'm never going to vote for him again because I want him to get to work on this history. Well, Webster did find a family who had formerly lived in Salisbury, New Hampshire, had moved to Rumford, Maine, and were not doing well in Rumford, and he hired them. He said, come to Dixville. Apparently, even with his great powers of oratory, he wasn't able to talk too many people into living in Dixville and to be the first. So he found these people from Rumford, Maine, by the name of Whittemore, and who are the forebears of the Weirs. In fact, Billy Weir's got some relics of the Whittemore family when they lived in Dixville. Now he has those in his possession at his home. Just beautiful samplers, hand embroidered, and the night bonnets that the girls wore. I hope someday to figure out a way to entice him to put them on display at the Balsams. So John and Betsy Whittemore moved into the Notch in 1812, and they brought with them their 3 children, Benjamin, Sarah, and Mary. And they lived there before there was a road. They simply had this old trail going through. It took 2 days for someone to go from Errol to Colebrook. There were hotels in Errol. In those days it was a small town. And there were hotels in Colebrook. And when people would get off the train or get off the steamboats and the narrow gauge railroads on the other side of, on the eastern side of Dixville, they could stay overnight in pretty good comfort in those communities. But the trek between Colebrook and Dixville was this 2-day trek, and no matter which direction you were going, you found yourself in Dixville at the end of the day. And so the Whittemores would find travelers at their doorstep at the end of the day, on occasion, not often, but on occasion. And there was a conventional kind of frontier hospitality that was expected. People who traveled would expect, that they could expect, they were free to expect, that if you encountered a home along the way, you could stop by and probably you would be offered accommodations for the evening. And the people who lived in those frontier homes welcomed travelers because they brought with them news and connection to the outside world, and they were generally interesting and made life the everyday kind of life that you would experience if you were living way out in the woods with nobody around, no neighbors. It made their life a happier existence, and so they welcomed people into their home. And just as we would today, when we say make yourself at home, that's a courtesy that you offer, but you don't really mean, because if people ever did make themselves at home, God, there'd be no way that we could live with each other. But what that means is we want you to feel comfortable, and we want you to be able to relax here, and to feel safe and secure and warm. And so Betsy would welcome roadside travelers into her home and say, make yourself at home, and they would know what she meant by that. And she would then go and do as much as she could in advance of the evening meal to make it a little bit more special than it would have been if the guests hadn't arrived. And guests would know that when they're in someone else's home, they would have to oblige that family. If that family didn't swear and didn't smoke in the house and said prayers, just said grace before meals, their guest would, even if he were the most heathen of uncouth travelers, he would do his best to behave in that setting and not insult the family with his own ways, as he might in a downtown hotel in Colebrook or in Errol, because he knew he had to be on a better kind of behavior. And the Whittemores knew that they had to be a bit respectful of their guest. If the guest did smoke, they might invite the guest to go out onto the porch after dinner and have his pipe out there and make it more comfortable for him, maybe with a piece of dessert out on the porch or whatever they would do. There was this obliging interest in each other, courteously expressed, very attentive in terms of how each other was relating to the other, and the stay was short, so if it wasn't working out, you basically could just say, well, they're going to check out tomorrow, right? They'll be out of here tomorrow. And of course the travelers did come and go, and it wasn't until the road was built through the Notch in 1817 that situations changed. Now, the road was paid for by a state lottery. In those days, many public work projects were paid for by individual lotteries designed to raise money for that particular project. And the Dixville Notch Toll Road Lottery was successful enough to pay for a road to be built through the Notch by 1817, which meant that traffic now could increase. And people wouldn't hesitate to continue on over the Notch. Now they could have horses, more horses, or oxen hauling their loads, and they could make faster time than they could if they were just trying to walk along an old Indian trail. And as a result, the traffic would have picked up, and the Whittemores would have found themselves in a little bit of a pickle here, because previously when guests had stayed with them, they didn't bother to think about charging guests. They would simply receive something in return for their hospitality. something in kind. The traveler might have liquor, he might have sugar, he might have salt, he might have things that they didn't have. He might do a chore for them that John couldn't have done all by himself. Somehow there would have been recompense for the hospitality, and it would have been fair, and it would have been honestly offered, but it would not have been in a measured amount. It would have just been an agreed upon trade of some kind. But now that Betsy and John could pretty well expect people coming by their door, they needed cash to be prepared to accommodate these people. They needed to have a stock of supplies in advance, anticipating people traveling by. And they had to think about how they were going to charge for that. Because in downtown, you would pay in the same way as people paid when they traveled in Europe, on an a la carte fashion. If you paid for what you wanted. You had a menu, and there were items offered and items charged on the other side. And you only paid for what you ordered. And indeed, most of the hospitality was subdivided into chargeable units. So if you wanted dinner but didn't want breakfast, there was no charge for breakfast. If you wanted a room and dinner, you might get a combined price, but that didn't include your horse to be stable. So you paid individually for the items of hospitality that you wanted. That was the European way of doing things, a la carte, pay as you go. How were the Whittemores going to do that in their home? Was Betsy going to put out a menu? No, she's still going to serve the same food in the same kitchen at the same table. It's just that she now needed to figure out a way to charge. And what people on the frontier did was to say, we have to be able to charge for the same kind of hospitality that we have been offering all along. And what their guests discovered, now that they could arrive by train in Colebrook and hire a wagon, excuse me, and make their sales calls or whatever else they were doing in this neighborhood, you could find real city slickers up here. People who had not labored to get to Colebrook, who simply rode a train. And they were now much more sophisticated people, less able to fend for themselves as the more pioneering travelers along the original trail must have been. These are people who were more closely connected to cities. And when they would come upon a place like Dixville Notch and then find this wonderful little inn tucked in around the other side, and the Whittemore's house, by the way, was, if you go up over the notch from Colebrook, up over the notch, head towards Errol, just before you come to the Moose Wallow, down on the right is a state turnout where the state highway has a sand building and a little graveyard there with the Whittemore still buried in it, and that was where their home was, and that was originally to be the Timothy Dix house. It was, in fact, on his map, it's labeled T. Dix. Well, what the travelers discovered was, hey, this is really something. Look at these mountains. I haven't seen anything like this before since my mother was telling me what the old country was like. I haven't seen anything like this other than in picture books. I haven't ever tasted water like this. I haven't breathed air like this, because these were people who were living in urban locations where the Industrial Revolution was supplied by coal, where the city streets were dirty and smelly, and where were crowded. There were tens of thousands of people moving into this great megalopolis that was forming along the eastern seaboard. That's why these people were up here. They were looking to connect all of that, to make a living off of all of that in some way. And so when they came upon a little place tucked in the notch like the Whittemores must have offered, it is not hard for them to imagine them saying to the Whittemores, when do the flies go away? When I would love to come back here and go fishing and hunting with my family and my brother-in-law Irving, and we could come here. If you would meet us at the train, we could come here for a week in August. Well, you have the formation of an American plan destination resort when you get to that level of development. And that level of development was reached all over New England, all over the Adirondacks, all over the Pocono Mountains, all over the Catskill Mountains, all over the seacoasts of Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Jersey. There were small, independent homes who took in travelers, who took in summer guests, who became destination resorts. One of my favorite stories is about the Neverly Hotel in the Catskills, which was basically a farmhouse where a lady took in people for the summer, and she had a few buildings out back that she wasn't using, so she converted them sheds, she converted into little cottages, and eventually she ended up with 11 independent little cottages out in back of the farm. Now, she's still trying to be a farmhouse, but she has these guests, and she was making much more money on the guests, and they took much more of her time and attention. And she said, look, we have to decide whether we're going to be a a resort or a farm, one or the other. And they decided on becoming a resort. So now she said to the folks who came back every summer, staying in one of these 11 cottages, what should we name the hotel? And they decided amongst them that the best name would be Neverly, which is 11 backwards. And the Neverly Hotel still operates in the Catskills outside of New York. That was these two things. You needed a rural environment next to an urban environment. So the Catskills in New York, the Poconos in Philadelphia, the Adirondacks and Albany and Buffalo and Rochester and Syracuse, the Cape Cod and Boston were directly connected. Certainly Boston and the White Mountains were definitely connected. And the trains then expanded that, because when the trains started coming into the frontier in the 1850s and beyond, it made it easy for all sorts of people to come here. And it was not, therefore, hard to understand how George Parsons could consider in 1866, at the end of the Civil War, that the best thing that he could do for his family and friends and neighbors was to go out to the notch and build a place for them. As I said, the previous owner out there, a guy by the name of Tucker, had built this place, and just he had taken out a fire insurance policy with Aetna Fire and Casualty for $2,000, and 2 weeks later the place burned down. It took him 9 years to get $1,500 from them, but eventually he did. Why don't we look at some slides? I can tell some more of the story here. I don't know whether we want one more bank of lights off or not. I'll let you decide. Okay. This is a block print from the Androscoggin Guide. Now, the Androscoggin Guide was one of the many travel guides that were written by the train companies that would tell people what they could expect when they were to go into these very exotic regions of the world. And quite frankly, it was often that they would send a traveler, an advanced man, who would simply do some sketches and write about what the places looked like, and then he would take that back, and they would actually, in Philadelphia or New York or Boston, produce the guides with artists who would take from the written word what they thought the place looked like. So in some of the early guides, you get impressions of scenery that really don't look very real. But this is designed for the old trails with the people going to the west towards Colebrook through Dixville Notch. These are known as the Three Brothers, 1, 2, and 3, and they are Table Rock, Old King, and the Profile Cliff. And on this cliff here is supposedly the profile of Daniel Webster. And we'll see a slide of that a little bit later on. This is John Adams Dix, the son of Timothy Dix, the 15-year-old boy soldier who had seen his father die, who later went on to become a general in the Civil War. He also was the Secretary of the Treasury under Buchanan and Lincoln. It was he quit being Secretary of the Treasury when Lincoln insisted that there be a national currency. He did not believe in the greenback dollar, and he did not believe that the federal government should issue its own currency, and so he quit. But it was for him that Fort Dix was named. He was a commissioner of the Erie Canal. He was a governor of the state of New York, and he was the land of Dixville eventually left his hands, and he had no more connection to it with Webster's dealings, but because it bared his name, he was there at the dedication of the Dix House, which the first building built in Dixville by George Parsons was known as the Dix House, not the Balsams. And where he was going to build that place is right here. This is a slide, a stereo slide from 1855, what I claim to be 11 years before the hotel was to be built there. And this is the modern road that the state lottery had paid for, coming through Dixville and on its way to Colebrook. There is Mount Abenaki to the rear where the Peregrines are, and the hotel sits right here. This is beautiful Lake Glorieta. This slide was taken by Franklin White from Lancaster, New Hampshire. This is the Tucker Hotel. This is the one that Aetna insured for $2,000. I don't think he got much beyond the construction of it and became disappointed in whatever business that was there. It only lasted for 2 years. And for those of you, can any of you figure where that might be placed on the current grounds? Do any of you recognize the background?
Near the dam.
This is Mr. Tillison's home right here. This is the port. Here are the all-weather tennis courts down over there, and the clay courts are right down in here. And the hotel is sitting over in this area, here. So here is a view from Table Rock of the beautiful Dick's house that was built by George Parsons. The lake had not yet been put in, and the hotel sits here looking back. There's the beginning of Mount Monadnock and Hereford Mountain right there on the border. Now, I don't know if you know this, but Mr. Tillotson owns Hereford Mountain, as well as the land in Dixville. Here is a wonderful picture, one of my favorites, from behind the Dick's house. Just as they cut some trees down and are clearing it out, and if you were to go into that building today and be on the other side of that wall, you would be in the John Dick's room where we have the cocktail parties. This is the kitchen, which was that a separate building. They knew enough to keep the kitchen separate from the main building. This is the brochure cover from 1882, and the hotel is pictured there. There's a sign above it that reads Dick's House. We have Pinnacle Peak, which has these 4 young people on it, and then Table Rock with the American flag stuck in that. Now, this is a very important picture because it relates to a number of other historical pieces. There was a fellow by the name of Captain A.J. Farrar who wrote about this neck of the woods quite often. He was from Brunswick, Maine, but he was very well known, is today even well known, for his stories about life in Parmacini, life in the Upper Coas, and he wrote wonderful books about that. The first book that I bought years ago is called A Journey Through the Wilds by Captain A.J. Farrar, and he talks about the old Dick's house and about life up here. And there was another book called A Trip to Parmacini, which has 85 pages on Dixville in this book. And I tried for years, over 20 years, to find that book, and have never had any luck. I have had it out to dealers, and dealers have told me that I would have to pay $250 for this book. It is so rare. But I said with 89 pages on Dixville, it would be worth it. We would pay the $89. We would pay the $250. And this summer, one of our waiters came down to ask me a question about the hotel's history, and he confided to me that his father was in the book business. His father works for down east, publishing. And I said, well, have your dad call his contacts and see if he could find the book. The kid went home that night, looked up on the internet. The book was available in Kentucky. He bought it for $25. So I had it 3 days later. And the reason that book is so important is it tells a story about these 4 kids. These 2 boys came out up on the train into Colebrook, hired a wagon to take them out into Dixville. And the book tells about the wonderful trip that they had from Colebrook out to Dixville, a 3 or 4 hour ride. The buckboard took their luggage, and they kept on being tempted by the Mohawk River and saying, oh, there's going to be great fish in here. So they got out of the wagon and told them to keep on driving out to the hotel, that they would walk their way up the river. And of course they got there at about dark. And George Parsons was on the porch, absolutely upset with these 2 kids. Because now they hadn't eaten, he had an obligation to feed them, he had to go clean their fish, and he was very, very upset with them for having not obliged him as their host to be there on time for dinner. And so he did it. He muttered all his way into the kitchen, and he cleaned the stuff up. He fixed their fish. On the way out, they had heard many farmers talk about how frightened they were for the safety of their family and their stock, because there had been a mountain lion rampaging the countryside and had killed many of their animals and had threatened some of their family. And so these boys had sworn that the next day they would go hunt the mountain lion. Wouldn't you know that they got up in the morning, Parsons is still fuming at them. They headed out into the notch. They found an 8-foot-long black panther and killed it in the notch. They climbed up the ridge, pulled the panther down, brought it back to the house. The guests are all absolutely astonished by this. Word spread around the countryside. Farmers from all over came out to see this animal. that they had killed. Farmer is the Parsons is eating crow because these two boys had shown that they did have some substance. And the two girls who had just come in to the hotel now found their two heroes who were there. And this whole story is being written up by Farrar. Well, what happens the next day is that the boys are out with the girls, they're out gallivanting like they are here, showing them the countryside. And they walk out behind the Parsons house, and they see this tawny animal cross their path. One of them raises his rifle, he shoots the animal dead. It was Parsons' heifer. And so that night he had his way with it. Here's a close-up in this guidebook, in the Farrar book, Trip to Parmacini. This is a block print from that. If I can, I wore my glasses so I could put it in focus for you. See? Here is an actual photograph of those same four people. I don't know how they did this, but there may have been a hotel photographer who was there because they later took this wonderful picture. This is they're on Table Rock with the flagpole that we saw in the 1882 brochure. I don't know who they are. But here they are sitting in front of the Dix house. You can see the sign up there that says Dix house? Now I'd ask you, does anybody know what's in this building today?
That's your garage.
Canteen, garage, what?
The garage.
Anything else? Here we go. So I want you to, eventually what happened was, George Parsons had married Clara Martin, and Dr. Martin is here tonight, right here. She was born in Stratford and married George Parsons, moved out to Dixville for the summer, and George Parsons died in the 1890s, and Clara tried to run it by herself but was unable to. When one of their guests, who was a long-time guest, he and his wife both suffered from hay fever, and they found great relief from it when they spent their summers in Dixville. One of their guests was a man by the name of Henry Safford Hale, this man. And he offered Mrs. Parsons money for her hotel in the winter, or the December of 1895. She sold it to him, and he renamed it the Balsams. He immediately, the next summer, took this building, the old building that we have here, and he renamed it from the Dix house to the Balsams. Now I ask you to take a look right there at that eave and that point, that chimney there. See there? So that building is now the dining room. So here we have the Balsams. This is an 1896 postcard. I can tell you postcards were first created in this country in 1896. Before that, the post office had no such means by which you could communicate to others with an open, non-sealed communication. And these postcards that are this old, generally you have to put your address on the back side of the card and you write your message on the front side. And so many of these cards had little spaces at the bottom or along the side, or you'd actually write your message right up in the sky. Here you can see the postmark of this particular postcard. But what Parsons did was to take that original building, what Hale did was to take that original building, he added this hexagonal, or I guess a octagonal frontispiece to the barn, and he added this tower to the side of the original building. He added this portico share there, the horses would come up and drive under there. But he did not make this the dining room. These were guest rooms. You see the door there? The guests would come out, walk out on the porch, and walk right into what's now the dining room, the bay area of the dining room, and go through that door and through that door. So there were 4 guest rooms there. And indeed, when you go into the dining room the next time, you can look at the different windows. These large windows are now all scenic picture windows, but next to them at these locations are all smaller windows that were at one time doors onto the porch. Here is the original floor plan from the 1896 brochure. And indeed, when we renovated this suite here, we called it the 1896 suite. And we have a deluxe suite up here, which is known as the Tower Suite, and that's actually the shape of the bedroom, is that that wonderful conical shape. And we're in the spring, we are going to be putting back this porch onto this suite of rooms, and we're going to be calling that the governor's suite. And I'm hoping to have all of our living governors give some sort of testimony to that. So here we are in what we know today to be the original lobby of the hotel. Now, this fireplace exists today, but that stairway does not. And there is the original front desk. You can see the kerosene lanterns. I am looking to buy that lamp because I have bought this lamp, and when you come back up to the hotel next, you will find that lamp, which is a kerosene wall lamp, which has hanging above from the ceiling on a chain. Its shade is hanging up there to prevent the fire from staining the ceiling. But this fireplace is gone. These are wonderful Morris chairs, which are no longer made, but these were the original reclining chairs. You see, you took the bar that was on the back there, and you could actually recline the seat. So I wanted to buy some more of those, but there was nobody making them. So now the Balsams is having those made for guest rooms from a private company. But this picture here, the photographer is standing right where this photographer is standing. So you look at that wall there, there's a fireplace right here with the writing over it, and where the grand piano is where the front desk was. This was the original stairway upstairs to the guest rooms. If you remember, there it is there, going up to the guest rooms. But that is gone, and now it's all opened up, as we know, to be the John Dick Social Room. Does anybody know what building this is?
Yes.
Sam Weeks' Tavern. That's my uncle that's got on that.
Right, so this was a replicated picture to show what it was once like when the Balsams coach used to go out to Dixville with its team of horses.
That was taken back in the old home days, and my uncle George Wood, that was his wagon and horses, and he was on that. And Hubert Wood, he was a former Episcopal minister from up here. He was on there that day, and his family.
This is the son of Mr. Hale, and I like to put this slide in because this is Warren Kilburn Hale, who is just obviously killed a deer. It's deer season now. It's deer season then. But he is sitting in an area of the hotel where I do this because I'm most often showing these slides at the hotel. But this is right outside the sunroom. This is the putting green right here. This is the music conservatory. That's the piano that we still have. There's that lamp again. I love that. And there's the lamp I was telling you about that I did buy, with the wall lamp, with the shade hanging from the ceiling up above it. So when you come back out, you'll see that. And this is currently the maitre d's desk. When you go into the dining room, you will see this. You'll see this piece of furniture in the dining room that John White stands at. I point this out because there are so few of these antiques that have survived. We just don't have them. Whoever was in charge of the hotel from this point on either took them themselves or sold them or threw them away or did something to them, because there are very few relics of the past that we were able to have there. This is the dining room in that era. These were all ladies with Irish names, many of them who would travel with the maitre d' hotel. And so he would be going to another hotel in the winter, and he would take all of these ladies with him. And indeed, when I was a kid and working there in the dining room, it was my obligation to pay the maitre d' so many dollars each week out of my tips. Otherwise, he wouldn't assign me a station. And the same was true as a bellman. I had an obligation to pay my boss every day. I had to give him cash in order for me to get fronts as a bellman. That was the system of pay then. I worked there as a caddy in 1959. That was my first summer at the Balsams, and we received no pay other than from guests in those days. And I left that summer, at the end of the summer, having paid $12 a week room and board and $2 a week for laundry. I left as a 13-year-old with $111 after that first summer. In later summers, as I got old enough to live and work in the hotel, the pay would be $100 for the season, and all of my other monies would come from direct guest gratuities. And that's where most of these women would have made their money. This is the original dining room, and I have just purchased this banquet lamp. So that when you come back out, you will see this on display in this day area. And now this is the dining room of the hotel. I really am looking for an expert on what all these pieces of china are for. You'll see there is the Balsams water jug. There's another one right there. And then there is these little dishes here, which are probably for salt, right around the different tables because they were eating family style. And then there was vinegar and sugar in the cube. But I don't know what this would have been, or this. What would have been in there? But there are people who know what these kinds of utensils are for. This is that dining room space right today. So this is where the original dining room was. The previous picture we were looking at, if you look at the sunshine on the floor, reflected on the hardwood floor, that is coming from these windows right there. So the picture was taken right from the door of the dining room looking backwards. And indeed, if you go back, you'll see that piece still sits in the dining room, right? And there is the entrance to the kitchen, which is basically where the fireplace is today, or where the stairway going down to the lobby is right through that entrance, right directly into the kitchen. Here is the crew in the kitchen. I think this guy looks dangerous. and then some later pictures of what the John Dick's room looked like here. Oriental rugs and hardwood floors. Here's a runner, an Oriental runner, with just the hardwood floor showing through. And indeed, it was this picture that caused us to design the carpet that's in the John Dick's room now, because when the next time you come out, you will see that there were patches of carpeting surrounded by solid colors to give the effect of multiple carpets that were once on the floor. We would love to revive the old hardwood floors, but when the hotel opened in the winter, it went through convulsions. And every pipe of the place that could break broke, every ceiling fell down, every hardwood floor buckled with all the water that was on it, all the upholstery shrunk off the furniture, and the carpeting just split its seams. So for the first 5 or 6 years, there was water everywhere. I tell guests that they have a much greater chance of drowning than they do dying in a fire at the Balsams. This is one of the original rooms. In fact, this is the room that we renovated and called the 1896 suite. Pressed wood furniture, no private baths, so they had a bowl and a pitcher, and they would have had a chamber pot as well, probably stored inside here. Here is tennis at the Balsams. We've had 103 years of tennis at the Balsams. But apparently back then they played it in street clothes with 9 people on the court. But this is from the 1896 brochure. And here are some folks walking on their constitutional walk, again fully dressed in Manhattan-style street clothes as they're walking down the road. This is a series of cards taken by this R.H. Cassens. I must have 30 or 40 different views, all of them numbered. This is number 148, I believe, taken in 1913. Here, the old horse trails, if you look back here, I think you will see some very narrow wagon wheels ruts, but by the end of the turn of the century, the horses were going out and the new automobiles were coming in. This limousine of the hotel indicated that we're going over to the station for Aunt Mary. Wouldn't we love to have that vehicle today? Here is the original spring house that was built alongside the road. Now, I don't know what year this was taken down, but it had been down in all of my memory of the hotel, which started in 1959. But Mr. Tillotson mentioned to me one day, I asked him if he knew when the spring house was down, and he said that it was down when he bought it. He couldn't remember what, or he didn't know when the spring house had been taken down. And he said, but I do remember the first time I ever saw it. He said, my father rented a wagon in Beecher Falls and took my mother and my brother and myself out to the Balsams on a picnic. And he said, but we miscalculated. We didn't understand how long it was going to take us to get there. So all we had time for was to go to the spring house, get a drink of water, and turn around and go make the 4-hour trip back to Beecher Falls. So he said, I can remember as an 8-year-old looking at that, going to the spring house, and then turning around and seeing the Balsams through the trees. So in 1994, when when he had bought the hotel 40 years before, we went and rebuilt the spring house in dedication of that, and indeed we had to cut down some trees on the other side of the road so that when he went over and had his first drink and turned around, he could still see the hotel through the trees. My partner, Raul, he said, we don't have time to build this thing. I said, Raul, I've ordered the brass plaque and it says 1994. This thing is going up. Now, this is another wonderful view of the hotel of Lake Laureate from the piazza, as it used to be called, the front porch of the hotel. Looking out, you can see the roadway that guests would travel to come up to the hotel and come right in front of it, right through what we now know to be Lake Laureate. Here's another picture of what it was like before 1898, but Hale, the engineer, in 1898 created this perfectly sylvan scene, and indeed, I didn't know until I spoke with, what's her name? I can't think of it. A lady who used to work as a housekeeper at the Hale Cottage said that the hurricane of 1936 blew these swans off out into the Atlantic Ocean. They were never seen again. Here's what was touted as the swimming pool, and this is just at the dam end of Lake Laureate. So the dam is right here. The entrance road is the service road is right here, and this is the nanny of that little boy, watching him and maybe his sister or brother swimming in what was called the swimming pool. And there were just to the left of that there were two bathhouses where they could change their clothes. Here's beautiful Route 26 with its modern guardrails, looking out over after the lake had been put in and looking out over the hotel. This is a picture that some of you may not know about, which is show it because it's taken from Sanguinary Cliff, not Table Rock, looking due west. There's supposed to be Mount Monadnock, and of course Lake Laureate is in. But Hale also built these two other lakes, which were Lake Coashaki and Lake Abenaki. And he had a new road built, because the old road, for us who can remember, was quite a road that left from down where the old Phillips house is, heading up to the hotel on the current pathway of the road. But in those days it was a very steep and roller coaster style road that I can remember going 60 miles an hour on my bicycle going down that road. It was a crazy winding road with 2 or 3 very major steep hills. And so the new road that Hale had built came up right from that hairpin turn at the bottom of the notch. It came up and it entered the Balsams grounds between the lakes on this old trail here. And it was intended to go around and not stop at the hotel, because this hotel was not going to be built. What he was going to do instead was to build a brand new hotel right here. What Hale had decided in about 1809, 1810, was that the old hotel was not going to be able to be modernized to meet what he thought were going to be the modern demands of the traveling public. And so he commissioned an architect from Manchester, New Hampshire, C.W. Witcher, to design this hotel. Now this hotel is situated right on this plot of ground, which we know today to be the lower golf course. But this is the top 3 holes of the lower golf course. This is the bottom 6 holes, under what's now underwater. So you were to come in and you were going to have this 400 room. Now we have to understand that the Balsams has 202 rooms now. We once had 232, but our renovations have brought us to 202. This was a 400 room hotel for 800 guests. And the old hotel is over here in Witcher's picture, and that was, I guess, going to be for employee housing. And this is, obviously, the architecture here is quite reminiscent of the New Hampshire house wing that was later built. And there's a date right down there which indicates 1909 is when this drawing was done. You see the large promenade down by Lakeside and the dock, and right there and there are 2 riverboats or lake boats that were taking guests out for rides. I can tell you that when we got this picture, it was completely unidentifiable for anything. It was completely covered in mold. And Mr. Tillotson said that he thought it was important. He couldn't remember what was under there, but the mold had grown all over this thing. Nobody could tell what was there. So we sent it to a preservation outfit in Andover, Massachusetts, and they kept it for 2 years. and they put another mold on the old mold that was there. And that new mold ate the old mold. And then they put the whole thing in an oven and baked the new mold off. And this is the picture that we got. The stains here are where they've actually eaten the paint right off of where the original mold had eaten the paint right off of the picture. So that was what caused us to buy SS Gloriette, was when we saw this picture with these lake boats on there, we thought, well, why shouldn't we have one? The poor boat died this year. But instead of doing that project, what Hale decided to do was to build this project. This is an architectural drawing. There's the original building. There's the facade that he added in 1896 and the tower that he added in 1896. But instead of doing what he was going to do, he added to this building. And his first addition was this west wing, which we know to be the ballroom wing, with about 60 new rooms, all of which had public baths. And there's no private baths in this area. And then he added the north wing, which extended out beyond here. And indeed, and there is now the guests were going to be entering at this level. See that portico there? That's a three-tiered portico with stages coming in and going out in three different stalls. But look where they were going into. That's still the dining room. You see that? So the entrance of this design was intended to have them enter right into what is now the dining room space of the hotel at that level. When I presume you all remember that when you walk into the hotel today, you have to walk up one flight to get to the dining room. Well, here is the first attempt at making that ground level flight. Here is the steam shovel digging out to land next to the hotel. And I ask you to take a look at this dormer here, and you can see it right there. So they are clearing the space for the north wing. Hodgepodge of buildings back here. This is the west wing being built, where the ballroom is, added on to the original building. This was Hale's house until 1912. This is where he lived, calling it the Wind Whistle. And in 1912, he had built what is now known as Beaver Lodge, or the Hales Cottage out on the lake, and this became the children's hotel, where children were checked into. The children and their nannies were put into this building, and they would have most of their meals over there and be allowed to visit the folks on Thursdays at tea time. Quite civilized. Yeah. So there's that wing, completed in 1910. Again, all with public baths. Here's the building of the north wing, and these are the dining room windows. But again, at ground level. There's that dormer that I pointed out to you as he's extending out. He just kept on digging. And it's like, remember that old steam shovel book when I was a kid with Mike who dug himself a hole and he couldn't get out, so they just made him the boiler for the new building that they were going to put in there. It was a great children's book. So by 1912, this was the Balsams. West wing, new west wing, 60 rooms. Original building had about 25 rooms, which he then added with that tower and with that facade and the rooms down below. He ended up with about 35. So he now had about 100 rooms. Then they added this section with another 25 rooms, 125 rooms. And the barns, which had housed horses, are being slowly converted to house automobiles because the horses are no longer so necessary. Here are the ladies carrying those jugs that we saw on the dining room tables. Balsams Spring Water, very fine company, uses this picture to promote Balsams Spring Water. As they sell it now in 50 states across the nation. 1916 and 17 were very, very industrious years at the hotel. Buildings were moved, buildings were torn down, new buildings were built, and here they are working all winter long through that era. And the old horses that were so elegantly used to transporting people were now giving way to modern equipment. Here's a Mack truck, chain driven, with Balsams on it. Again, wouldn't we love to have that? This is the building of the garage, which was at that time a 3-story garage. There was a floor deep down into the cellar that would store some hotel vehicles, and there was a second floor here of of vehicles that could pull in, and then the main floor of the garage, which is now all part of the Tillotson Healthcare. There are some of the vehicles. These were chauffeurs' quarters, so the guests, chauffeurs would stay here. These were dormitories for the ever-enlarging hotel. It takes more than one staff person to deal with, to accommodate every guest. So in those days, it took about 500 hotel staff and another 100 of the guests' own staff to deal with, to oblige all of the services and needs that were necessary. By this time, the train had stopped, the passenger train had stopped coming to Colebrook, and it was going to Whitefield, and so there was a fleet of Cadillacs, and formerly before that, Rolls Royces and LaSalles that would go down twice a day to meet the train in Whitefield. Here are some chauffeurs waiting. I don't know what kind of car that is, but they're either waiting or... I keep thinking this is Jimmy Martin, but I know he's not that old. Does that look like Jimmy Martin? And of course, this is the announcement of the new wing that he was going to build, the new fireproof addition to the Balsams, to the Hotel Balsams, Dixville Notch, New Hampshire, by C.R. Witcher, architect, Manchester, New Hampshire, built by H.P. Cummins Construction Company, which is the general contractor for the renovation of the hospital, going on today. And here they are building the first steel and concrete building built in New Hampshire, an 8-story high-rise. Completed in 1917 and opened for the season in 1918. These were guest rooms of the hotel that were furnished with Ethan Allen furniture. And because of the fact that there were 14 inches of concrete and steel between every floor, every wall of this hotel, it was considered to be completely fireproof. And as a result, the hotel developed a great deal of fame because people were very frightened of fires in these remote hotels. In fact, so many of them had burned down, and they were all of a particular set of people in Boston or New York or Philadelphia or wherever they were from, and they knew people who had been in these resort fires. And so from 1917 till 1938, the hotel hardly ever had a picture of the wooden building again. It only showed this new wing. And in 1938, the sprinkler system was put in, and then it went back to promoting the whole place. And of course, many of you will remember that the cars used to drive in underneath the dining room, be driven down around here and back through here, and then parked in one of the garages. Now, the hotel is completely connected with a series of tunnels, and indeed, I spoke to a doorman last summer who said that when he worked there in 1928, first of all, he paid the hotel for his job. He made so many gratuities that the hotel knew this, and the manager insisted on being paid to hire him. And he said, I never took a day off because I knew I was doing enough money. And when I did take an afternoon off, twice, he said that summer, I was offered money by the bellman to fill in for him. So, but he said what was so amazing was that the guests knew how far away their car was because they had driven to that garage before. And so they knew it to be a several-minute drive. What they could never understand is how could the doorman take their car safely, get it to the garage, and then be back out at his station just a few minutes later. They thought that he had twins. That's what he would tell them, is that he and his brother were the doorman, that the two of them were doing this deal together. The hotel had 16 different farms on the property with one of the largest existing Holstein herds and Jersey and Shorthand cattle, the sheep that were used to mow the golf course, and Berkshire swine, and draft horses, trout, and deer parks, all sorts of animals. Do you know where this building is?
Yes, about that.
That's right.
Where?
It's right next to right next to Danny Hebert's building, which would be right over here. So the hotel.
Oh, that's the old green hall?
The hotel had to have horses in town as well as out at the hotel because to make multiple trips during the day. This is farmstead number 1. This place got demolished with the flood of 1929 when those two lakes washed out that we saw there. Okay, here's the deer park that existed. Right where Warren's house is, where the captain's cottage is. This is old Byron, who, this picture was on the 1915 fishing game guidebook that year. And, but this was old Byron from Colebrook. I don't know what his last name was. And he was the official trout guide for the hotel. Of course, the clubhouse was built. Albie Lyons told me that his father told him that when this building was built, they had ox carts hauling these stones from the Androscoggin River, and each stone was put into its own cubicle, and each cubicle was lined with a bed of hay, so that the stone wouldn't get chipped or scratched on the way up here to build that building. Last year, we took the roof off, the tiles off the roof, for the first time since the roof had been built, and we took all the tiles off and found enough of the tiles to repair this side of the roof, and then we had all new tiles on this side. And the same company that built these tiles in 1902 was still around in Cleveland, and they built the exact same tile out of the same substance to put on the roof there. It was $28,000 worth of tiles, plus the expense of putting it back on the roof.
How long it's gonna last?
It's just some fun things. This is a fun gambling game that was played here with small horses. We still play this game, only we use moose now. Basically, we have a cage with a die in it, and you roll the cage once, and whatever number die comes up, that particular horse, so horse number 2 or horse number 1 or 3 or whatever, then moves. You roll the die again, and if it rolls 4 spaces, that horse moves 4 spaces, and the guests bet on which horse they think is going to win. It's a fun game, and all the money that's bet is given back. But there were times during the 40s and 50s when there was a lot more gambling than this going on at the hotel. We're hoping to reinstitute archery at the hotel this coming summer. And when I was a caddy in the rain, we used to go down to the old bowling lanes underneath the factory, and there were 6 lanes there. When I was a kid, Ricky Tillotson was in charge of this, and so we only worked on rainy days. And then he'd call me down from the caddy camp to come down and help him set pins. Here I think they actually had rubber bowling balls, but if you go out to the hotel, you can look in one of the display cases there, and we have a wooden bowling ball that was first used. Here's a lecture on the lawn. Here's the ox cart. Take the people up to the golf club right out where the flower garden is now, and there's the scenic patio where Ellsworth plays right over there. Now this is the start of J.J. Lannon's ownership of the hotel. Hale had made some bad investments. Hale had friends in Europe who had told him that Germany was going to take over all of Europe, and there was no counterpower that could ever withstand Germany's force. And so many of the royals of Europe and the bigwigs of Europe were actually hedging their bets by buying German bonds and investing in German currency. So Hale thought that would be a great idea. If Germany was going to win, why not own part of Germany? And so through the early part of the 20th century, he started spending or investing money, millions of dollars, in German currency. Unfortunately, he didn't quite acknowledge that when the U.S. declared war against Germany in, 1917 or 1918? So he got into real trouble for his German connections. Not that he was in support of Germany, it's just that he had done what others in Europe were doing, thinking that it was the insider's way to make money, and he didn't quite know how to get out of that after the U.S. had declared war, and he actually he lost his investments, and he had to be bailed out a little bit by his brother, Warren Kilburn Hale, and he sold the hotel in 1918. He sold it to this man, J.J. Lannon, who was originally a Canadian, who had gone to Boston to work for his uncle in a hotel in Boston. He learned the hotel business, had risen up from bellhop to manager, then got involved in putting a managing company together to manage other hotels. Then he started buying hotels, and he went from Boston to New York with his influence. But while he was in Boston, he also owned the Boston Red Sox. And he owned the Boston Red Sox when they last won the World Series in 1918. And so riding high, just like they would have this year, if they could have won a game. Riding high with the third win of the World Series in 5 years, Lannon sold the Red Sox for $800,000 to Harry Frazee from New York. Frazee, this is a picture of Lannon, which we got from the Baseball Hall of Fame. Now, he was a wonderful man apparently, very astute businessman, and he used the $800,000 that he made by selling the Red Sox to buy the Balsams, and took it over in 1918 and ran it very successfully. During the Roaring '20s, apparently it was as successful as the hotel had ever been, and he was a consummate manager and owner, and from everything that I can tell, it was not only very well run, but very fairly administered, and he was a good guy. Lannon moved on to New York. He ended up buying the Garden City Hotel on Long Island, the Salisbury Club on Long Island, and he met a man one day at the opening of a brand new hotel in Brooklyn called the Grenada Hotel. And this hotel was a residential 10-story hotel that had just been built, and the owner of that hotel was in the lobby when J.J. Lannon walked in. Now, that owner, whose name was Frank Dudera recognized Lannon because Lannon was a famous hotelier, and this guy was a brand new owner of a hotel. And he went up to him, and they welcomed him into his hotel on opening day. They had a few drinks in the bar, and when they left, they had traded hotels. They had traded hotels for no exchange of cash. Lannon got the Grenada Hotel, and Frank Dudera got the Balsams in 1927. So this is a story that came directly to Miss Tillotson from Frank Dudera. So I know it to be true. And Dudera came and loved, here's the profile clip of Daniel Webster. Another wonderful profile is of Martha Washington, which you can see if you go right to the top of the notch, and you have to get out of the car before you get there, you climb up to the top of the notch, and you just look to the north, and you will see this magnificent profile of Martha Washington in a rocking chair with her evening bonnet on. You see that bonnet? And she's looking right at Colebrook. And more scenes there. This is Frank Dudera. He was a policeman in Brooklyn. That's how he started out. And on the side, he would paint and decorate and paper to make extra money on his days off. And so, in 1911, I believe, when he was off duty, going down the street in Brooklyn, one of the apartment houses was on fire. And he rushed in at his own peril and to see if he could rescue anyone. And there was a family there who was in dire need of rescue. And he saved the mother and child. Their last name was Walker, of the New York Walkers, of the George Herbert Walker Bushes, of the Walker Cup Walkers, the very famous Walkers, of the Jimmy Walker of New York, was the mayor. Later, I don't think he was at that time. Well, he was written up in all the papers for this great act of heroism that he had done. And when they were giving him all of his honors, which included an honorary captaincy in the New York State Police, from which time he never was referred to anything else as captain, he was asked, was there anything that the city of New York could do for him? And he asked for a sabbatical, because he thought he could do better as a paper and decorating contractor than he could do as a policeman. And he wanted a sabbatical that if it didn't work out, he could go back and not lose his seniority. They gave him that. They also gave him the contract for all the city buildings in the city of New York to paint and paper. So police stations, fire stations, administration buildings, health buildings, hospitals. And so he had a pretty good contract. It was that connection that got him into the hotel business when he met Lannon. Dudera came to the hotel. This was his dog, Duchess. This was his niece, Dolly. And does anybody remember the name of the lady who used to work for the Hills? She lives up at the Monadnock Village now. I want to say her name is Clara. Oh, she was married to Richard Purcell.
Cleona.
All right, Cleona called me because she had worked for the Hales, for the captain, rather. She had worked for the captain. at the captain's cottage. And I said, well, what's this? Could you tell me, Cleona, about the relationship between the captain and Dolly? And she said, I never thought it was any of my business, and I don't think it's any of yours. I said, but they have been dead for a long time. And I said, there's all sorts of rumors. I'm just trying to set history straight. And she said, well, she wouldn't tell me. We were on the phone for 45 minutes. And finally she said, I know that you have an honest interest in this. I will simply tell you that one day when I was making up the captain's bed, I found a ribbon to Dolly's nightgown amongst the sheets. Did any of you tell Cleona that I told you that? I'm going to deny it. This is Dolly Winter with her castle of fish, their dog, their Great Dane Duchess, and the wonderful captain, Frank Dodaro, who was a true sportsman and a very elegant owner of the Balsams. He bought it on trade with Mr. Lannon in 1927. In 1929, on May 5th, the dam went out. And it took 72 homes off their foundation here in Colebrook and caused great havoc and destruction. Nobody lost their life because they knew the dam was going out. But it certainly had to test the relationship between the Balsams and Colebrook when this, because all the dams that Hale built all over the damn place broke at one time or another. We almost killed the Lyons family on the golf course. And you know, every dam, of course, and the last one to go was 1960 when the reservoir dam washed out. But the captain was able to rebuild relationships. I've never heard anybody speak poorly of him. In fact, I asked Mr. Tillotson, I said, was the captain your friend? And he gave a wonderful answer to that question. He said, Steve, he said, the captain never said that he was going to do something and then did not do it. And he never did something important without telling me about it first. And he said, but I can't call him my friend. And I said, why not? He said, because he was from down below. Which meant that he was a trustworthy man, but he didn't trust him. Here's the captain playing polo on what was going to be Hale's wonderful hotel site. And that is Mrs. Coleman. And that is his son, Dickie. Charlie Coleman. But and they had one more son. That is not Mr. Coleman. I have since found. I have other pictures of Mr. Coleman, but that is not him. What I learned just this last October, a friend of mine invited me to go to a Jesuit retreat for a weekend. And so I went to Massachusetts and went into a seminary for the weekend, and we had this wonderful weekend of reflection and lessons. And when the old Jesuit who was conducting this retreat saw my name tag and knew that I was from Dixville Notch and the Balsams, he came up to me and he said, you know, we Jesuits almost bought the Balsams once. And I said, well, you must be. I've never heard of anything like that. And he said, well, that's the truth. And I said, well, God, I just never heard anything about that. And he said, I'll look it up. And he did. And when I got back, he had sent me the records from their Jesuit log, which indicated that in 1942, the Army was going to take over their seminary in Western, which housed 1,800 people, and make it a hospital for the long-term convalescence of people who had been wounded in the war. And therefore the Jesuits needed to move out of there to find another place to conduct their seminary work, and they looked all over. The Ocean House in Swampscott, the Poland Spring House, the Mount Washington, which had closed down in the war, but they did not find any suitable place until they found the Balsams. And then they were eager to buy the Balsams. Captain Dodaro was going to sell them the Balsams for $750,000 in 1942. And the deal almost went through, except that the Army at the last minute decided not to use their seminary as a hospital. And so the Balsams went down an unholy path after that. And Dodaro did pursue his deal with Alvin Coleman. And I don't really know anything about Mr. Coleman other than that there were a lot of people who have very spicy opinions of him. And I got into trouble the last time I relayed some of those opinions, so I'm not going to do it. I'll let you go on your own devices with what kind of person he was. I do know that he was heavily involved into gambling, and have researched that. because his other son, Dickie, who became a TV star, had his own television program, a weekly program in the 1960s, the early 1960s, but was shot to death in his Manhattan apartment, which ended his political career. I mean, ended his TV career and every other career. In his work, he stated that his father was a gambling impresario, and that he owned interest in 18 different hotels and casinos in Havana with Batista, the president of Cuba, who remained president until Fidel and Che rose up. But our own state police rose up against the Balsams on August 4, 1951. This is a photograph right from their records on their raid of the Balsams.
They raided the Legion out there one night too.
Did they? Well, you could place a bet at any racetrack in the country at the Balsams in those days. You had roulette wheels and craps tables and poker tables and all sorts of gambling going on. And a good deal of that money, I would caution you, was not being spent locally. It was, as I say, being taken away and spent elsewhere. That is really one of the poorest aspects of the old style of tourism, when it didn't qualify, in my opinion, as much of a natural resource, because the people who owned these hotels frequently did not hire very many of the local people. They certainly didn't accommodate very many local people, and they hardly ever bought from local people. And so they simply used the environment, the place, and took the money and spent it elsewhere, either on other hotels or other businesses. Modern tourism is a very different ball of wax, and I can tell you that we have a $5.5 billion payroll, which is primarily spent right here in Colebrook, and we do as much as possible in terms of buying services from the local providers. And of course, that's all due to this fellow right here, who's about to turn 100 years old on December 16, my wife's birthday, and his, this year. And we're going to have an open house for him, and I hope that you will all come on the 20th. You'll see a notice of that in the newspaper. He wants his friends and neighbors to come out and say hi to him on December 20th, which is a Sunday afternoon from 2 to 5. So I do hope that you will come out. But it is he who bought the hotel at a public auction. Fred Harrigan approached him and said, you have to come to this auction. The local people are asking for somebody to come out or this hotel is going to close. And you're the only person that I know of who has the wherewithal to even consider buying this hotel. And he said, I'm not going to buy the hotel, I will come to the auction. He came to the auction, and immediately when he walked in, Fred said he went over and he got Frank Tudera, who was not a well man, but he called him over and they introduced each other to each other for the first time, and they formed a partnership on a handshake right there, the Tillis and Tudera Company, and he bought the hotel. He put in a bid, the only bid. We make more money on a good night in the bar now than what he paid for it that night. But of course, he then paid a lot more for it in the succeeding years, because from 1954 through the early 70s, it continued to lose a lot of money, and it wouldn't have survived if any other person had owned it. It would have been converted. There would have been land sales. There would have been condominium sales and townhouse sales and time-sharing sales that would have changed the nature of that place. But he did not want that, because he did not buy it because it was a hotel. He bought it because it was where his grandmother had homesteaded, and where Titus Hodge, Mary Titus Hodge. And we've just hung a picture of her in the main lobby area of the hotel. On one side of the entrance, as you walk in, you'll see Mary Titus Hodge, and on the other side, you'll see, what do I want to say? Orson Orville Bunford, who was the first manager that Hale hired, and that was Francis's husband's grandfather or father? Grandfather. And he said that this was a fit of middle-aged sentimentality that caused him to buy the Balsams. But I can tell you that his ownership of it and his dedication to it are going to have blessings for this community for hundreds of years to come. Hundreds of years to come. I believe what he has in mind will shed its grace on this community and on all of us who care about the Balsams for years and years to come, beyond our own lifetime. I can tell you that this summer we signed our partnership, which has been in place now for 28 years, signed a long-term agreement with him that lasts longer than our lifetimes. And that what we plan to do is to pass on our administration of the hotel to employees. The only people who can own the stock of the Balsams are fully employed people of the hotel. So there's no family involved, there are no outsiders involved, it's just us. And when we pass our stock on, it has to go to a fellow employee, not a family member of ours. If they're not employed, they're not going to be able to own the stock. So I think it will become even more a place of the Great North Woods and of this community, and that is all for the good. I don't know many people who've had the privilege of having one place in their life as much as I've had this place in my life. Whatever I am has been based upon the way I've seen life at that in Dixville Notch. And I am very, very proud to have been part of the hotel's success story in recent years. I'm especially proud to be a member of this community and to have my children raised in this community and to be welcomed to do such things as this for people who I was I'm very touched by all of you who have shown up tonight to hear this story. Now I'm going to do something. I'll be happy to answer some questions, but I have a little present that I want to do, and that is I have dinner for two to some lucky winner. But I couldn't figure out how we were going to do this. I didn't want to handle all sorts of tickets. So I came up with a decent way. This will give you an opportunity to stretch. What I want you to do is to guess the total number of employees who worked at the hotel this summer. Now, there is a set number, and it's written on here. And the person who guesses that is going to win dinner for two, which is right in this food fight. So I'd like you all to stand up. Everybody stand up. Now, there's the way we're going to begin is by saying, if you think there were more than 500 people employed at the hotel this summer, I want you to put your hand up. If you think there were less than 500 people, I want you to keep your hand down. But those who think there were more than 500 people employed at the hotel this summer, put your hand up. Okay, there were more than 500, so all of you who did not have your hand up, sit down. And all of you who did have your hand up, stay standing. Okay, how many of you think that there were more than 600 employees employed at the hotel this summer? Put your hand up. All of you who don't think there were more than 600 employees, put your hand down. If you don't think there were more than 600 employees, put your hand down. Okay, those who thought there were not more than 600, sit down. And those who thought there were more than 600, remain standing. Okay, how many of you thought there were more than 700 employees staying at the hotel, working at the hotel this summer? Put your hand up. And those of you who think that there were not, keep your hand down. All of you with your hands up, stay standing. All of the others sit down. All of you with your hands up, stay standing. Okay, now we're going to get into the real nitty-gritty. How many of you, so that we're now over, that was 600 or something? That was 700. So there were over 700 employees working at the hotel this summer. How many of you think that the number is odd or even? Those of you who think the number is odd, put your hand up. And those who think the number was even, sit down. Stay standing, but keep your hand down. Stay standing, but keep your hand down. All of you with your hand up, sit down. All right, now I see one. How many people are standing? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Are you still standing, or you're not playing?
Oh, I lost out.
Okay, now I'm just going to have you try and guess the number. It's over 700, and it's less than 800. So the closest one, without going over, is going to win. All right. 750. Here.
732.
760.
760. 751.
760.
There's already a 760.
735.
735. 725. It is 754.
Now who are you going to take? We're all friends.
Well, thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Long term, is still any plans for the sort of the indoor sports?
We're approaching it sidewise. The Balsams has made all of its renovations since we started doing so by paying for it out of the out of the cash flow of the hotel. We have not taken any mortgages, we've not taken any large bank loans or loans from Mr. Tillotson to make all of the improvements that have been happening at the hotel. And we've been able to do the improvements that we've accomplished little by little. And now they're really beginning to add up. And the thing that scares us off of a new indoor pool complex is that it will cost several $1 million. And it means going to a bank. And that's a very frightening thing for us, because this is a very fragile old lady who I think is standing on the strongest base that she's ever had. We have 85% of our employees return. We have very strong seasons, back to back, year in and year out, but there's still not a lot of money left over when we get through spending $800,000 or $900,000 a year on renovations, as we are continuing to spend every year. And so to sign up for a long-term indoor pool project is something that we really have to be confident about, and which probably won't happen for a couple more years. In a couple more years, we will have totally renovated all of the guest rooms. We have gone from 232 guest rooms to 202, because all of those buildings that didn't have private baths, when they put the baths in, they cut all the floor joists, they ran the plumbing on the outside wall, they did all sorts of terrible things. And so we have corrected that, and we take a whole corridor, we take all the walls down, all the interior walls inside that corridor, and we reallocate the space. So a long corridor that may have had 12 rooms on that corridor ends up with 8 rooms, because we're making decent-sized bathrooms and putting in all new plumbing and wiring and insulation and walls and brand new windows. The renovations are in excess of $20,000 per room. So it's a very sizable renovation program. We've gone from 232 rooms to 202. Definitely, if we ever got back to 232 rooms, we could pay for an indoor pool many, many times. So the question will be, do we do one project which adds back the original number of rooms that we've had in the first place, and using that extra income, which will be sizable, to pay for an indoor pool, or do we do a combined project, which I think might be possible as well, which is to build a pool with 32 new rooms on it, or 30 some odd rooms that would do this. Because with these renovations, we are experiencing stronger business. People want to come more because we have nicer rooms. The only pressure we feel is on the highest rate. That is, we have too many people wanting the highest rate. Nobody wants the lowest rated rooms. We have never tested the highest rate that they'll pay. And we have rooms that sell for over $600 a night. We do not have a great number of guests who object to the high rates that we charge. Again, we're still like John and Betsy Whittemore, where everything is included. There are no prices on the menu, and there's no charge to ski or play golf or go to any of the entertainment, so it's a complete package. But the people who come to the Balsams, 85% of them return, and they do not object to what they're paying. So I think that there is very strong evidence that there will be that kind of facility coming in the near future. This year, we are right now building an exercise room. And so we will have a fully furnished exercise equipment room for guests when we reopen at Christmas time. Last year we put a masseuse in, and Sheila Parkhurst is booming out there. I think Sheila wants additions already to her facility. And our guests loved it at a lot of money that they're paying per hour for these back rubs. I tell you, it would rub me the wrong way to have to pay that much. but apparently not our guests. And I think one of the big mistakes that we make when we think about these kinds of issues is that we think about what we would pay, what we would do, right? And that is not the right way. You really do need to go out and see what it costs elsewhere, and then know whether or not what we're charging is reasonable. Yes. One of the schemes that we have for the indoor pool, I personally would like the indoor pool at Beaver Lodge. I think we could do it less expensively, and to have a remote pool would please me, because I don't relish the notion of encountering somebody in his thongs and bathrobe as other guests are going to dinner. Yes, that would be the Hill House. But we also have a plan which we have thoroughly researched and priced to have the pool connected to the Hampshire house but built underground, so that part of the problem is an architectural challenge to add a big building to those buildings and not make it look weird, because those buildings look weird enough as they are now, and to add a third element, it would be very difficult. But we have a plan that would actually put the thing underground so that you would see very little of it. You wouldn't see any of it from the drive-in area. The only place you could see it would be at the lake. You'd see one end of the pool, which would be all grass. So it is conceivable that we could build it underground. That would not allow for extra rooms. On that complex, we'd have to build the rooms someplace else. If we built it at Beaver Lodge, I think we could build extra rooms quite easily.
Oh, the extra rooms would be okay.
Well, it could be, but nobody agrees with me, so who knows? Yes.
What's the average stay of guests then? They used to come and stay.
Right. It depends upon what time of the year we're talking about. During the traditional social season, there were still people spending a week there or longer. We have some who spend over a month there. The best thing to understand about the Balsams is demonstrated by this little bit of trivia. Last year, let me say this, when we slightly enlarged the dining room a few years ago, we added a space no bigger than this space right here, but we needed whatever space we could get because we had to find space to put 144 tables for two. Out of our 400 guests, 288 of them were coming as couples. And we needed 100, because we didn't want to seat people who didn't know each other at a group table. We wanted to have individual tables for two. And they take up the most space. It's the most awkward way to accommodate that many guests, to try and seat them all and serve them all in tables for two. And we didn't have enough space, and we were getting this demand for more and more tables for two, and we didn't know where we thought we might even go to a second sitting. We did clear out the space, taking a little bit of what was in the coffee shop formerly, and we found enough space to have 144 tables for two. This summer, we never used more than 50 tables for two. Because what we were using were tables for 10 and 12 and 14, because we had family reunions up the kazoo. They were huge extended families where people who had lived in Boston or New York or Rhode Island or Philadelphia or had retired, and their kids had gone off around the country, and they've got one daughter in Texas with her husband, and one son in Michigan with his wife, and another son in California with his wife, and when they came, they all wanted to come back and be together, but they had no place to go, no home any longer big enough to accommodate the family. And so they started coming to places like the Balsams. This has been a trend all over the country, and it will continue through 2015, because the baby boomers have had their kids, and they've got some money, and they're coming. They want to come back and be with each other, but they're spread all over the country, and there's no easy way. They don't see each other throughout the year. We had, on average, 170 children in the houses every day during July and August this year. We had, in some cases, 40 or 50 babysitters hired each evening at, I must tell you, $7 an hour, something like that, to babysit a kid. It's good pay if you'd like to earn some extra income in cash, direct from guests, with gratuities not included. And we are very much oriented toward developing children's programs. We have children's programs now which deal directly with 3 to 5-year-olds, 5 to 7-year-olds, 7 to 9-year-olds, 9 to 11-year-olds, and we're negotiating with the possibility of developing adventure programs for the teenagers to try and keep them at the hotel. We also went up on our rates for children about 20% for next summer, because we're concentrated so much on developing these programs for families. So during the summer, longer stays. In the spring and the fall, we have primarily groups and people coming in for what are called getaways. Most people today are insulted. They're not insulted. They're threatened if you say, "Are you enjoying your vacation?" People just don't feel comfortable enough to even admit that they're on vacation. They want to say, "Well, I'm just taking a break. I'm making phone calls, believe me. I'm keeping my finger in the water." Just like people are quite often reticent to say that they're retired. They think that that's an accusation to their worthiness when they say that if you ask them if they're enjoying their retirement. I can't tell you the number of people who just apologize like crazy and do a little dance to deny that they're actually retired and having a good time. So we find a lot of that. These are very aggressive people. We're going to be putting in an email station for guests to use in the lobby of the hotel this summer. It's a constant, demanding business. I can tell you this, that Mark Twain said that saints may perform miracles, but few could run a hotel. I would agree with you. It is a very demanding business, much more demanding than it used to be. When we're talking in the era of Lannon and Dudera, there were guests who would come in, 500 guests, 400 guests, whatever, but they'd be there the whole summer. There'd be a continuity, and you'd have just a few of the ongoing problems. But today, when you're checking in guests in and out of the hotel with 754 employees trying to train them and get them to be able to do this through a short, pressure-filled season, it turns your hair white. Yes.
How big are your lands? What's the holding of land?
Well, Mr. Phillips keeps on buying, so I have to keep on checking to see where we are. I just bought about 900 acres to add to the Dixville property. I'm not exactly sure between the two because both properties, the Hereford Mountain property and the Dixville property, are being put together in his foundation. So it's over 20,000 acres. Yes.
Do you have any pictures from the houses that were down away from the hotel at one time?
I have some.
I was born where
Really? Oh. You have to come out because I have a few albums. Some of the pictures that you saw on the slides here I've made from albums that I've either had to acquire or people have been kind enough to donate. I would say that I'll take this opportunity to, because I can, without any embarrassment on my part, I stand before you and say, if you have something that would be better served to be at the Balsams on display with credit to you, then give it to me. if you have something for which you want money, sell it to me. And if you have something which you will loan and I'll give you back, whenever you tell me to, loan it to me. But it's at the Balsams. When you come out there, I challenge you to walk around the place, look at the walls. We are celebrating that place in every nook and cranny on the walls of the hotel. We're offering this traditional hospitality. Understand that if you go to a modern destination resort, you are going to find the community of guests who are staying overnight, yes. But you will also find a much larger community of landowners who have townhouses or time-sharing or condo rights next to the golf course of the ski area. And so when you go to that kind of hotel, you as a guest are in competition with all of these other people who have even higher claims to service and attention than you do as a paying guest. The Balsams has resisted all of that. And I can promise you that it will never happen. It will never happen that you will see developments along the golf course or the ski area. It will never happen. And so it is only guests there, and only you, and staff, and visitors that are using this place. And with an 85% return rate, they're almost natives themselves, so to speak. They care a lot about that place. They're very possessive. They want their same room. They want their same table in the dining room. They want the same person to serve them as their housekeeper or their waiter. And we're keeping track of all that. We have 95,000 names of regular guests that we are writing to twice a year to keep them informed of what the Balsams is, and they care about it. They need it. They want it in their lives. And so this is a place that is truly treasured, and I know that many local people do treasure it, and especially given its checkered past when, in many cases, I know that people were at one time not that welcomed up there, and that has certainly changed. And to have reunions and hospital balls and proms and graduations, exercises, and all sorts of other local events there, it makes us very, very proud. From each and every one of my partners. Chef Learned works harder on the food prepared for local people than he does on anyone else. Because he just cares more. He wants to make sure that we're treating our friends in a special way. And so if you've got something that you know that belongs to the Balsams in some way or other, I'm not going to ask any questions. But don't just drop it off at my desk. I really would like to make sure that we're properly treating it. Yes.
Steve, you said when you were showing us the lamps in the dining room
you had bought that one and you wanted to buy that one. How did you track those down? How'd you
There
know?
are lamp dealers, so I'm going through dealers who are looking for that.
And they know that it came from
I
the
send them,
Balsams?
no, they don't, but
Or
they.
just one like
They're
it?
buying ones, they know just what that lamp is. That banquet lamp, I have an exact duplicate. It
I
could very
see.
well be that banquet, it could be
So
one of
I
those
see,
right
it
there.
isn't the exact lamp,
No,
but
those are
it just
gone.
means the
Those
one
are
like
gone.
that.
Unless you know where they are. I mean, but I don't have a picture. I don't have a Balsams picture. I have a Balsams wash bowl that I had to beg for, and I have a few Balsams chamber pots. But I don't have a Balsams picture. Can you believe that? With all the pictures that must have been there with that seal on it one time. Yes.
I picked up some Balsams dishes. I found it in a little old antique store up in Colebrook, but they had one room full of those old lamps. But if they've torn that antique store down, if you can find out what they did with the stuff in there, you might be able to.
This is in Quantico?
In Colebrook, just it's right across from the, well, it's gone now. They
It is
put
gone.
a hole in there with
I
it.
see.
But somebody would know.
Well, I think we're going to find the lamps. The lamps are not a problem because they're readily available. And I have these two, and they're both going to be up, and we'll be celebrating that. But the third one, that double bowl lamp, is a little bit rarer. But eventually we'll get it, and I'll pay for it. I had a picker from a dump in Lancaster sell me a sign yesterday. This is a long sign that says, actually, somebody needs to explain this to me. It says, 47.4 miles to the Balsams Hotel garage. And apparently it was on display in Lancaster. Now, why they would have been promoting the hotel garage, I don't know, but this is an enameled sign. And the problem is that enamel signs are in and of themselves collectibles. So people who are into buying enamel signs put high prices on them. And then they don't even care what it says. But the fact that it was a Balsam sign, I have this guy pulling stuff out of the dump, and he wanted $200. I eventually settled on $125. But when you come out to the hotel, you will see this sign. The one good thing about collecting for the Balsams is there's nothing that we should not have. If it once belonged out there and we don't have it, we ought to get it, whatever that is. I can remember being at an auction when Richard Cross said, "Steve, do you have one of these?" And I said, "Not yet." But we were going to get them no matter what, because that hotel deserves it, and the people who love it deserve to experience it.
I've got, excuse
I
me,
took out a souvenir, little green shoe, got the Dick's house on it.
Really?
I had that, so I never thought about taking it back out the Balsams. So Neil got the Balsams, and it was sold up in his parents' store up in Beach Falls as a souvenir. And I took that out to the rest.
Well, I'll never see it. Give it to the wrong person. Rick's my best friend, but I'll never see it.
I've got an enamel sign of Balsams, but it's, it's, some of the paint has been broken off in it.
Yeah.
When we was kids, we used to use it for making a bridge there for a truck road.
Well, it's lots of fun, and it grows and grows and grows. If you were there last year and you looked around, it's no excuse. There's all sorts of new stuff up. We just hung 40 or 50 new pieces on the walls, so I'd urge you to come back out again. And we're always renovating, so you'll see the new looks that make it look old again. Yes, Dr.
I was just going to say, in the vein of early guests, Francis Parton got his IT stuff in the North Country before he went out on the Argonne, out exploring in the West. When he was a Harvard undergraduate, he came up here and he went up to Dartmouth College. And he's in the era that you're speaking of, when the farmhouses were taking care of sports. There's an example of exactly what was going on.
For sure.
Well documented. Starters.
Time is slipping by here, so.
Yes, if you're going to have a meeting, we've got a college here. I hope that I did bring my collection of postcards from Colebrook and put them on the table there for any of you who would like to see them. I have 4,000 postcards, which we use to serve as the basis for all the art that hangs in the hotel guest rooms. So we put different postcards up on the walls of the renovated guest rooms and with the messages from the past. One of my favorite of which is, must have either been from a student or a teacher, but it said, we're finally here and no algebra. And the other one was, boy, is this place expensive. We may have to sell the flivver before we can leave. Well, thank you very much. I've enjoyed it.